You are listening to the Therapists in the Hot Seat podcast with your hosts, Tom Coates and Tom Holland-Pearse.
Hello and welcome to the Therapists in the Hot Seat podcast. This is episode 7, and this is the podcast that's hopefully bringing you helpful and supportive guidance in an accessible way, but also trying to have a little bit of fun along the way. My name is Tom Coates, and I just wanted to start off by apologising for not being able to record last week. Unfortunately, I was far too unwell again, and as a result, we had to push recording to this week. And the topic we were going to do, which was relationship OCD, will now be following this episode. So for people who were waiting for that episode, I really do apologise. I appreciate your patience, and it'll be with you very soon. Unless it's cursed, and maybe I'm always sick when I come to record that one. We'll see. Just to say as well, we also have our Buy Us a Coffee option on our website. So if you haven't visited our website yet and you want to visit and say hello, please do drop by and take a look at that. So my name is Tom Coates, as I mentioned, and I'm joined by my colleague, Tom Holland-Pearse. Would you like to say hello, Tom?
Hello, everyone.
Fantastic. And we're also very lucky to be joined today by Becky Crepsley-Fox, who's a sexologist, relationship psychotherapist, Tantra practitioner trained, hopefully hear a bit more about that later, and who also has a diagnosis of ADHD and actually uses that to help individuals who have a diagnosis of neurodivergence to overcome barriers to intimacy. So that's really interesting. Nice to meet you, Becky. Thank you for coming.
Nice to meet you. Thanks for having me.
No, you're very welcome. You're very welcome. And Becky is here with us today to discuss sexual dysfunction within relationships and how this might be also linked to dysregulated nervous systems. So if anybody is struggling in that area, this could be a really interesting topic for you. But we're also going to be discussing more broadly the importance of sex within relationships and obstacles within long-term relationships as well, which I think is probably just a more broader sort of normalized thing that people may experience, whether we have dysregulated nervous systems or not. Mm. But before we get to that, as always, we start with our check-in. So, Tom, I've talked enough already. Are you happy to check in and let us know how you've been getting on?
Yeah, absolutely. So today, we haven't even seen that many clients, had just 2 clients, but 4, and then in between, me and my partner are getting married. We're trying to sort out all this wedding stuff, and it's just this logistical nightmare beyond what I ever thought it could be. I had no idea it would be this problematic to get married, but there we go. So kind of dealing with all that. But then it was really nice coming into this chat because I haven't seen Becky for years. And obviously me and Becky used to go to school together. I've known her for a very long time. And it's really nice to reconnect with you, Becky. And we were also having a really good laugh because Becky's obviously like really comfortable talking about sex. And me and Tom appear really bashful talking about sex. So it's quite funny, really. So it's got me in a much better mood. So yes, thank you for being here, Becky.
Thanks so much for having me.
Tom, do you want to check in?
Yeah. Thank you. Again, just having a week off or another week off on top of our normal week made this feel very alien and scary again. We had to do another version of this intro, didn't we? Just because of that. So, hoping everything settles down and that I settle down soon. I'm still not 100% well, if I'm honest. So last week I was shivering and sweating and a mess and not being able to get out of bed. And then I'm feeling a lot better this week, but definitely nowhere near where I need to be. But trying to juggle everything, being ill, looking after the little man, trying to run a business, trying to see clients and to do everything. So just to feel like I'm juggling at the moment, and I'm ready for bed when it comes around, let's put it that way. I'm equally feeling a bit nervous about talking about sex because, again, we're British, Tom, aren't we? We just don't really do it. But also, my father-in-law listens to this podcast. So that could be a very awkward conversation over the next couple of weeks. So if you're listening, Chris, I do apologise. Maybe switch this one off. But other than that, all good. Becky, how are you?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you. Today's just been a little bit intense. So I wake up and I take my baby to swimming and then we come back. And then, as I was just explaining to the Toms, we've got scaffolding that's being put up on my roof. So there's like people there, banging away. So
are they right there, right in front of
they're
your
literally
window?
there.
That is awful. That is
the
so
wall is glass,
distracting.
and they're there.
Oh, that is
banging
so
big
distracting.
holes. I know.
And you've got ADHD, we've learned today, so this must just be awful.
So yeah, I'm good. I'm just feeling a bit like, what's next? Let's go.
Yeah. Sometimes I feel life is just this like dopamine treadmill where you're just jumping from email to to-do list to thing to this.
I love dopamine, Tom. Don't get me started on dopamine.
You should try cocaine. I think you'd really get on with that.
I wonder what that's like.
Yeah.
Josh, right, going to come back in now, guys. Let's not really try cocaine. That's just that caveat in there. If anybody chooses to use cocaine on their interns, that's you. Okay? That is not our professional advice. But no, dopamine is a pain, isn't it? But we get those immediate hits, and it's very short-lived. And I'm trying to tap more into my oxytocin, legal oxytocin. In fact, my own body's oxytocin. But yeah, sometimes failing at that.
Yeah, it's really hard. I think dopamine, it's because it gives us those pleasure reward cycles. That's the one that people feel like they're gravitating towards more and more. But if we can move towards contentment, towards oxytocin, then it like levels out this playing field so much more. So you're quite right. What we want to aim for is oxytocin. But I think because dopamine is much more achievable in short bursts, that's why people play video games and smoke and drink and have sex even.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think the last time I felt completely content was in a bar in Spain, on the beach, looking out at the sea with a bowl full of oysters and a really cold beer, and one of those frozen glasses. So if that's what I've got to do to be content, that's what I've got to do, right? Let's go back and do a bit more of that. Okay, thank you very much. So we're here today to talk about sex and dysfunction within sex, really, and the impact that this can have on our relationships. So I wonder if we just jump straight in and think about what role does the nervous system play, Becky, in impacting sex, our experience of sex, our desire for sex, and our ability to have sex?
Okay, so because this is quite broad, I might go on for a while, so feel free to interject or jump in. Would I go as far to say, okay, let's say nearly everyone, not everyone, but nearly everyone I work with comes in through some sort of dysregulated nervous system, because dysregulated nervous systems can have such a vast impact on relationships, but more specifically sexual experiences within relationships. So dysregulated nervous system can be the reason why we have sexual dysfunction. So let's think about physical sexual dysfunctions. We have something called vaginismus, which not a lot of people have heard of. So what this is the involuntary contraction of the pelvic floor muscles in people who have got vaginas and vulvas. So vaginismus can be quite extreme. So maybe they've never been able to insert anything into their vagina, or it can be maybe more context dependent. So in certain situations, they can insert some things, but in other situations, they can't. This is just an example of something that can happen to people with vaginas and vulvas and women. But nearly every time I work with someone with vaginismus is because of anxiety or some sort of stress response in the body that's causing the body to do this tensing and tightening up.
Yeah.
If we're thinking about men and people with penises, dysregulated nervous system can be the cause of premature ejaculation, delayed ejaculation, erectile dysfunction. It can be the cause of not being able to focus in sex, not being able to be present with your partner, or not being able to enjoy it. So it really, like, across the board covers like such an array of what I might call dysfunctions or sexual difficulties.
Can I ask a question, Becky? Several, actually. So what's that word? What is it called?
Vaginismus. Yeah, it's hard to say.
It is. I tried to spell it. I was like, that's clearly not right. Vaginismus. With that, then, so the nervous system is the reason for the tightening of the muscles. Is there a reason it's specifically the muscles in the vagina that tighten? Is there any? What's that about, do you think?
Well, there is a linkage to do with jaw tightness and pelvic floor tightness. So quite often people who have bruxism or like clench or grind their teeth may also have a really tight pelvic floor, so a hypertonic pelvic floor. I imagine that for a lot of people who have this tightness in their vagina, they hold a lot of tightness, presumably over the rest of the body. But that's not to say that this is the only reason for vaginismus, right? There is also, for example, if someone was brought up, for example, Catholic, and they were told sex is shameful, sex is bad, no sex before marriage, their body might be internalizing those messages. And then when they come to have sex with their partner, their body might have tightened up. So that person might not have the tightness all over their body, but their body knows, oh, this is something I shouldn't be doing. This means I'm bad.
Wow.
Let me go into a stress response. Pelvic floor tightens, penis can't enter, fingers can't enter, things like that.
Well, it's amazing that the body can like learn it. Do you know what I mean? It's getting messages, but it manifests in the vagina.
Absolutely.
That's amazing.
Yeah, and I think it's like just another example of the body trying to keep us safe, right? You know how fight, flight, freeze, I imagine you guys talk about this as well, in the way I explain it as these responses are happening because when we were a child, we went into the set way of being to keep us safe. We ran away from the tiger. We kind of hid from the tiger. The body doesn't know that we're not actually escaping the tiger in real life. So this is just another way of the body trying to keep us safe. If sex is bad, let me close up. Therefore, you've been kept safe.
Interesting.
Does that make sense?
It makes a lot of sense. I've got loads more questions, but I'm worried I'm going to go off track. But
go ahead, Tom. Ask one more.
Okay, one other question I've got is, and I'm sure you've read this book, Becky, because I saw it on your website. But you know, The Body Keeps the Score. That book, like, with it, I've only flipped through that book. I need to read it. But if a woman had experienced trauma in her vagina for various reasons, like, well, obviously sexual abuse or childbirth, anything like that, is there a sense of is the tension more readily held in that area, do you think? Or
quite often, yeah. So even a negative smear test can be enough to cause this kind of tightness and tension. Yeah.
Wow.
And it can be really, really horrible. Like some people can't insert tampons. They may have to, come and work with me for 6 months or 9 months before they can have sex with their partner. Sometimes it's not like that and we can get to the goal much sooner, but it is exactly that. The body is holding this trauma. And until we work through the trauma, work on letting the body know that it's safe, it's really, really hard to release and let go in that way.
Because it's not conscious, is it? If it's fight or flight response, it's happening to you, as it were.
Exactly.
Wow.
Yeah. And, if we're talking about men and people with penises as well, this nervous system is something that I talk about and work with a lot. And a moment ago, I was giving references to this tiger thing, but I'm going to explain it for the listeners. So the idea is when we go into a state of something that feels unsafe for the body, the unconscious mind, the kind of, the unconscious mind works before the cognitive mind can step in. And it does typically one of these three things. It wants us to run away from the scary situation. That's why we call it flight. It wants us to, attack the bad thing. That's like fight. Or freeze is usually what happens if those two other options aren't available to us. So this is like our shutdown, our immobilizing sense. When it comes to sexual dysfunction, not always, but most of the time, it's the body going into this fight or flight situation. So it's like pumping adrenaline, pumping cortisol around the body. And the way that they talk about it in The Body Keeps the Score, the book you mentioned, is that the nervous system does not yet know that we live in like modern day society. The nervous system still thinks we are like hunter-gatherers, that we're like with that tiger, and that's who we're fighting and that's who we're running away from. So what happens when we see a tiger, and the tiger could be feeling nervous about having sex, being worried about, because the person you're with you find really good looking and that makes you feel really anxious. It doesn't have to be a bad anxiety. And what happens is the blood flows to the areas that it needs to go to in order to help you survive. So the blood might flow to the lungs to help you like breathe as you're running away. But what happens then is that the blood doesn't go to the penis, right? Because if you have an erection when you're running or fighting a tiger, like that's probably going to get in the way.
I couldn't take it seriously if someone was running away from me with an erection. I just would be like, I'm not even going to chase you anymore. That is, I can't, I'm not interested in that.
I'm off with this whole thing now.
Yeah. I feel it wasn't taking me serious enough as a predator. I feel like you're not really thinking about this properly. Yeah?
So maybe the nervous system's doing it all wrong. We should allow those erections to be there. And the tiger might be like, see you, mate. And then for premature ejaculation, again, it can be because the
so I'm
nervous
just going to furiously take down some notes for a second.
The nervous system's like, wow, we better get this out of us because we've got to run really quick. So we've got to expel all these fluids. Yeah.
Wow.
And that's why some people, they may have like nervous poos and wheeze because, again, we're getting rid of that fluid. So we're lighter to run away. It's a similar thing.
Wow.
Sorry, I was just going to say, Becky, so many of my clients have this struggle, and kind of the other way to the example you gave, in that many of them will have relationship OCD, and they might be thinking, oh my gosh, am I going to be able to please my partner? Am I going to please my partner like their previous partners have pleased them? Am I going to be able to sustain an erection? What if I'm not attracted to my partner? And as a result, with all of that worry going on internally for them, then it takes away from all of the interest in what's actually happening, and therefore they are unable to perform, which then is then used as more evidence against them anyway. See, you don't find your partner attractive because, look, now you can't even get an erection, or, oh, look, you can't please your partner, and I bet the previous partners wouldn't have had a problem with this, so now look at the position you're in. So it becomes a real self-fulfilling prophecy, doesn't it? That then it means people are even more likely to avoid it then after that.
And thank you for naming that, Tom, because I think you putting that out there, so many listeners will be like, oh, I have those thoughts, I have those worries. It's not just me, because they are so common. And I do think sexology is a lot of trying to break up these vicious cycles, you know, with that vaginismus I spoke about. It's this, I tense up to keep me safe, then trying to insert hurts. So then I tense even more. And then I'm worried because next time I think it's going to hurt. So I tense up more and then it does hurt, you know, and exactly the same with what you were talking about with erections and the nervous system and ejaculation as well. If we're worried about how we're going to perform or what we're thinking and feeling about our partner, or even external stress, it doesn't have to be what's happening in the moment. The nervous system does not know that that's not a tiger. Like it cannot tell the difference between worrying if you fancy your partner and trying to run for your life. It doesn't know. So it reacts the same way time and time again.
So there's a few layers there, I guess. Like I hear we're talking about the autonomic nervous system that happens immediately without any conscious awareness. That it's already happened to you by the time you're aware of it.
Yeah.
And all of the fallout there. And then also, as Tom was saying, some of the thoughts that come, I suppose, a millisecond after, that we can also get completely locked in, which leads to obviously more fight and flight response and more negative thoughts as well. It's so easy to see how this could be an issue for people. Like, it's almost amazing if it's not an issue for people at some point in their lives, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Like, we can so easily see that happening.
And the research shows that nearly every man is going to experience some sort of erectile problems in their life. When I work with men, I say, you know, if we're working on, let's say, erection issues, are we, by the end of us working together, are we getting erections maybe out of 10 times? Because if we aim for 10 out of 10, that's unrealistic, because most men who I'm not working with don't always get their erections. So we need to bear in mind real life and real anxieties, and that, you know, we're not performing monkeys, right?
Yeah, it's a lot of pressure, isn't it? There to think, actually, I'm not a performing monkey, but there might be expectation on me, whether it's internal expectation or external expectation. And then how do I manage that? And I suppose you've got lots of experience of helping people sort of compassionately look at this. So if I was sat in front of you and saying, look, Becky, this won't work. I'm trying really hard and there's lots of pressure. What would you say to me?
Yeah, and I think a nod to what you said earlier, Tom, about being British. I think being British doesn't help the situation because we are so coy. I'm not, but we are so coy as a whole, as people. So I think people come in to speak to me and they've never spoken to anyone about this before. Maybe not even their partner, or maybe not even their general therapist, because they feel like, well, I don't want to tell my general therapist this because they know me too much and I've worked with them for too long. So I think part of the problem, Tom, is the fact that they don't know how normal it is to have these issues, because no one is talking about this. It's unlikely you're going to go to the pub with your mates playing snooker or something and you're all talking about struggling to get erections or ejaculation. So the way that I start is by normalizing, right? That this happens.
Even, sorry, I interrupted you. Sorry.
Yeah, go for it.
I was going to say, even when we came on the call and like me and Tom were like dancing around the S word, not going to say sex, and you went straight in there with like saying the word penis. I was like, oh, I don't know. Oh. It's just like, you're right to normalize it though. You're so right. We are a coy nation. Men, in my opinion, I guess men would be more so, because you don't talk about it with your mates, for sure.
Yeah, I think you're right.
So...
Some women are more likely to talk to their girlfriends about these types of things. Men, I think, much less, because of the pressures that are on you all.
Can I just interject again? Something just came to my mind. I was working with a client ages ago, and we were discussing how they were talking to me about premature ejaculation, and they said they learned it was a learned behavior, because when they were like a teenager and they were masturbating, their parents would go out and they would be in such a rush to get it finished. Yeah. There was like an element of fear response with it, like, got to get it finished. And I think that really spoke to what you were saying earlier about like, expelling liquids, unnecessary liquids. But like,
Tom, how old were you then?
I was working with a client.
A friend of mine.
Yes. Matt, what's the rush?
Yeah. We'll just call him Tim Holland-Pearse. Tim Holland-Pearse was his name. Good guy. Which one's
Tim? You or the...
Yeah, so I thought it's interesting though, isn't it, that your body will, like, it's not conscious. A lot of this stuff is not conscious. It's not your choice. It's just, I don't know, the way things are at the moment.
And that's not uncommon, that example that you just shared about rushing and then your penis getting into the habit of ejaculating early. And that can also happen a lot with people with erectile issues, because it's like, I need to ejaculate now before I lose my erection.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. That's what I was going to say as well, because I don't want to make this a therapy session for me, but this, my friend, now I'm joking. I've got a friend,
Tom Boats, I think it's called, isn't it?
No, but surely there's like a biological element to this, right? In that, if you think back to the cavemen elements, especially with premature ejaculation, you want to be first past the post, don't you? In order to think about reproduction. So in a way, if we're trying to think about prolonging sex and not ejaculating, actually that's going against the reproductive system in a way, right? I suppose.
Yeah.
So you're trying to say I'm evolutionarily advanced, Tom? Is that what we're saying? I mean, Tim, other Tim. What is it?
So my friend John, he can go like 20 minutes, right? So what does that mean about him? No. So yeah. So do you see what I mean, though? In that surely
definitely.
Then you're kind of pushing a rock up a hill in that case.
I heard another fact, Becky, please fact check me. But apparently the shape of, what do you call the end of a penis? What's the proper word? You know what I'm going to say, Becky, don't you?
Yeah, I do, yeah.
Do you want to say it for me? Because, like, you're not squeamish. I'm squeamish. Like, because you can scoop.
Yes, exactly.
You say it.
I told you this.
Probably where I learned it from.
So, apparently, the reason why the penis is shaped as it is, with that, how would you describe the helmet is what people call it. Yeah. So everyone knows what I'm talking about. The reason why it's shaped like that, with the kind of ridges around the outside, is so when it gets inserted into the vagina, when it comes out, it pulls older sperm out with it, therefore other people's sperm, perhaps. So more chances of impregnating the person you're having sex with.
Yeah. That is crazy evolution right there, isn't it?
Wild. Yeah.
Yeah.
How do we get onto this topic?
Don't know. Quite enjoyed it.
That thing. I'll tell you off air. Okay, so we've kind of looked at the different types of dysfunctions and the impact it could have. So Becky, if I was in front of you and saying that these are the issues I have, I'm struggling to maintain an erection, I'm really worried that I'm upsetting my partner and causing lots of stress, I'm stressed, what would some of the interventions be? I'm not saying take me through it in depth, but what kind of things would you perhaps be suggesting for that person?
Yeah, so I think to caveat it, I think it's really important that the person who's doing this work has a partner who's really on board with it. Because if you have a partner who's shaming you for your, dysfunction, it's going to be really hard to make progress, because every time you come to a sexual experience, you're going to be filled with guilt and shame and anxiety. And it's going to be really, really hard. So I think the first step is to have your partner on board with this as best they can be. So maybe like couples therapy, coming here together, having conversations with their partner. But that's the first step. And then we're looking at, okay, well, how do we get out of your head? Mostly, because mostly we're in the head, and into the body. And a lot of that is about just like being in the present moment. I'll give touch-based exercises where they can practice tuning into sensations. They'll do that on their own first, because obviously when you're with a partner, it adds a bit more stress load, a bit more anxiety. So we want to really practice these skills of tuning in, noticing what can I be aware of now, so that when you take it to your partner, I'm laughing because you're laughing.
I feel like I'm like 6 years old again.
I just see you like snickering, like.
Lots of things are popping into my mind. I'll tell you after. Go ahead. Sorry.
Put it in the chat and I'll have a little laugh while you guys are talking.
So then when you take it to your partner, it's harder. It's harder to focus. And it's just about, what do I notice? What sensations can I feel right now? And just really drilling that in. So it's almost like a mindfulness practice, but focused on touch in sexual situations, ideally with your partner. And what that's doing is, it means you're in the moment more, even if it's just a fraction of a second. And then that's a second. And then that's 2 seconds. That's 2 seconds where we're regulating the nervous system. You might do some breathing before you come to that sexual space, where the exhale is ideally longer than the inhale to activate that parasympathetic nervous system. This is our rest and digest. We want this polyvagal nerve. This is the nerve that does like loads and loads of good stuff. We want that activated. And by breathing really slow and deep, it activates that polyvagal nerve and the way we want it to be activated. So setting yourself up by going to sex when you're not really stressed. If you're overwhelmed and stressed and exhausted, that's probably not going to work out in your favor. So let's set ourselves up to have the most chance of it being positive as possible. Do your breathing first. Go in, tune into your body. Ideally, have this supportive partner with you. I know we can't always control that, but that's what we're aiming for. And already everything is settled so much more that we can then start to look on like the actual physical, getting the penis involved at that stage.
Yeah. So it's really about taking the pressure out of the room then, in a way, and sort of making this a really safe, welcoming space. Whereas, whatever happens, we're just kind of here to be.
Exactly.
We are here together to be.
Yeah.
And that then will increase the opportunity.
This is it. How do we broaden the definition of sex? Like I say to my clients, what is sex to you? Is that just penetration? Is that oral? Is that kissing? How can we make this like intimacy time to be the thing that we're looking for? If you get an erection, bonus. If you have penetration, bonus. But what are all the other things that can be part of this like tapas of a sexual meal that you're going to have? Because if there's lots of stuff on the table, there's more chance that things are going to go as you want, less pressure, and then in turn, more chance of an erection.
So you're saying that sex doesn't actually have to be about penetration. It could be like just a sensual massage or some, and with no erection or anything like that. It could just be, is it always physical, do you think? Or it
doesn't have to be. I would say most people I work with, for them it is. I think it's up to, the couple or whoever it is that's having sex to kind of make that definition themselves. And there are some people I work with where penetration is really important. And for them, that is like the be all and end all. And that's okay, because then we just have to work slightly differently, because they do have that, strong emphasis on penetration. But for so many other people, actually, when we break it down, they're like, I just want to kind of, be connected to my partner and experience some pleasure. And, if I orgasm, great. But, that's not necessarily what we have to be doing every time. It could be a massage. There's also soft penetration exercises that I give to people where they can have sex, but without an erection. It requires a bit of setup, but, it's still a way to have that genital connection but a bit differently than how we would imagine it.
Interesting. Yeah, because I definitely think, like for me personally, it feels like connection would be the main goal for me.
Yeah.
Like if having sex, I think I want, intimacy, connection with the other person.
Yeah. And then I'm not asking you this, but I would then ask, okay, and what
Yeah.
is connection and intimacy for you?
Yeah.
And then you're basically telling me the answer.
Yeah. Interesting.
Don't want to answer that one, Tom?
mean, you can
pass
answer
on
that.
that. I'll pass.
Okay. So what we're seeing here is that the whole pornographic kind of Hollywood movie, scene of sex isn't actually necessarily the way it has to be. It can be much more sort of present, relaxed, connected, without having to be, this is what sex is. But I imagine a lot of people will be going in thinking, this is what sex is. To be a man having sex, or to be a woman having sex, or to be a person having sex, I need to do these things.
Yeah.
So I suppose a lot of your work must be about breaking that barrier down, right? And saying there's so much more to sex than that.
Exactly. And that's why, because even people in couples, maybe more so now, but they're not having these conversations together. So each of them may be thinking, oh, I feel like I have to have this type of sex, when actually I would be quite happy to just have a massage and a naked bath, and the occasional oral sex, for example. But then when they come in, I kind of force them essentially to talk about it. And we find out actually neither of you want that type of sex that you both felt like you had to have. But because we don't talk about this, so many difficulties occur. So again, it's normalizing conversations. What intimacy do you want? I ask people, what's your driver for sex? Is it orgasm? Is it to feel pleasure? Is it to connect with your body? Is it to connect with the other person? Like, what is that thing that you want when you go into sex? And that's your answer. Well, let's do more of that.
Interesting. It's very interesting.
I wonder how many couples are thinking they're kind of in line with each other in sexual needs, and actually are way further apart than they actually thought they were. Just because they're sort of thinking, okay, well, this is just what sex is. This is what we've done for so long, and we just repeat that. And nothing ever else is introduced, I suppose, or changed as a result.
Yeah. And especially when I work with solo men, I don't mean single, I mean, one-on-one. A lot of the time they ask me questions like, oh, I really want to make her orgasm more. So like, what should I do with my hands? And I'm like, ask her. Like, literally ask her, because she would love, mostly, not everyone, but mostly she would love to be like, this is exactly what I want.
I think women should actually come with an instruction manual that every individual, like, before we do this, what are the do's and the don'ts? Because I don't know what the hell's going on, frankly. I think I would save a lot of time.
But, a lot of women feel like they can't say that, right? So
they really feel they should. They should. Can we get a petition? I think that needs to be.
You start it, I'll sign, put it on my Instagram.
The other thing I was going to say, though, and not to deviate too much, and I'm not quite sure if this is one of our topics, but with porn, obviously, like, our generation and forevermore probably are raised on porn. That's people's first experiences of sex. And I'm pretty sure a lot of pornography does not really represent what happens in most people's bedrooms. Do you ever come up against that in your therapy? Like, is there a real mismatch between what people think it should be versus what it probably actually is?
Yeah, and actually, most people where that is a real problem are the younger people that I work with. And I only work with 18 plus, but I would say like 18 to 22 at the moment are the age where they're coming and saying, like, I need to be having this type of sex that they've seen in porn. Is how am I supposed to do that? Because I guess they don't have the experience that people maybe in their 30s, 40s, 50s, they may have got to an understanding of, actually, this isn't the type of sex that I need to be having with my partner or on a one night stand. It definitely still is a problem, because they feel like my erection needs to be as strong and as hard as it was in that video. But the actual style of the sex, from what I see in my practice, it's these like 20-year-olds, early 20s that are struggling with it. And, I see them with erection and ejaculation issues because they're so worried, because they don't know how to have that type of sex. So, but no one is. No one's having that. I think the only type of sex that maybe people are having are people who are in the kink scene and are watching kinky videos. Maybe that's a bit more like the type of sex they're having. But for people who aren't in the kinky scene, no one's having sex like that. Very, very rare.
It's like a cardio workout sometimes, isn't it? It's like, Jesus Christ, he's got...
But also is this normalizing, you know, for me to say, you know, they do have like drugs and they're like injecting their penis. And
yeah.
like,
Is that right?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I
Wow.
watched a whole documentary on that. Louis Theroux, I think.
Love Louis Theroux.
Probably.
Interviewing a heterosexual porn star who was choosing to do homosexual porn because
I've seen that one. Yeah.
it was much better. Yeah, and he lived at home with his partner, and whenever he was on set, he had to have I couldn't tell you what it was, but he was injected into the base of the penis, and then it became something you wouldn't want to run away from a tiger with, Tom.
Well, 3 legs, you could run faster, in fairness. I don't know.
Not with that, you wouldn't. That would trip you up. But yeah, so that was how they maintained it.
Wow.
That is then painting unrealistic imagery, isn't it, of what things are, and then you feed that into the minds and attention of 20-year-olds, 18-year-olds, and people are thinking, oh my gosh, like that, you know, that person seems to be able to go on for 2 hours or whatever, and well, you know, why isn't this working for me?
Yeah. I think we just need to learn porn is theatre. Porn is Hollywood. It's, you know, we don't go and, you know, watch a 007 movie and think like, oh, I need to be James Bond, like jumping off this like boat into the river or whatever it is that they do. It's the same with porn. I think it can be a lovely tool for people to have solo sex and masturbate with, or even use, you know, for eroticism with their partners, if we know that it's theatre.
Yeah, good, a really good point. Can I ask another question about porn? Because this is something that comes up with my clients quite a lot. Is that some people worry that if they watch too much, in their opinion, you know, a lot of porn, and then they masturbate to that, they are then worried about their ability to perform with their partners. Is there anything that's about maybe desensitization to sex through that you know about, Becky?
Yeah, it's not uncommon. It is actually a thing. So, you know, I'm not against porn. I think it has its place and can be, as I just said, like, if we know what it is and what we're watching, it can be a nice accentuation to eroticism. But yes, that is a thing. People can maybe go down like a porn rabbit hole. And what a porn rabbit hole looks like is that the porn you're watching needs to be a bit more intense, a bit more intense, a bit more intense. And then eventually you get to a place where you're watching porn that is so far from like maybe even what you're initially attracted to, but from reality. And that's when this dopamine that we spoke about earlier comes into play, because you start needing that extreme to get the dopamine for your sexual response to play ball, so that when you're in a situation with just like a naked person, your nervous system doesn't know that that's arousing, because that's not anything like what you've been watching.
Wow, that's really interesting and a helpful way of explaining it. Because
in normal life, like obviously, be very, very, very few cases where sex would ever become as extreme as pornography is. So it's quite an unnatural state to find yourself in, right?
Yeah. And sometimes I work with people who are worried about that. They're like, you know, now my taste is quite extreme, and like, I don't, how much further can I go, basically? And I'm worried about this. But if we can desensitize that way, we can also go back.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
So it's, well, let's start watching porn that is a little bit less extreme. Can you still get an erection? Can you still ejaculate from that? Great. Now let's go back a step. Can you know, ejaculate? Can you get aroused from that? Let's go back a step. I
bet that's such a nice process. Yeah, sorry?
That's good news for you.
Yeah. I was going to say, I bet though it's such a nice process to like come back to reality with sex, to really appreciate your other person, you know, in a lovely way, like as I suppose as it was supposed to be before the internet got involved.
Yeah, absolutely.
I could see that being a really nice process.
Yeah. Well, it's really tangible, right? Measurable. I know what you two do, CBT, is very measurable. Like this is very measurable in those instances as well.
Yeah. Gosh, I kind of had flashes to sort of sleep restriction, you know, when people start to reclaim hours. So sleep restriction is where people are only allowed to sleep within a certain amount of time. Becky, and if you know about this, it's a treatment for insomnia.
I read about this recently. It sounded adorable.
Yeah,
It is
well,
horrible. It's absolutely horrible, but
I
it
mean,
does
look,
work.
if you sleep on average
Really
5.5
works.
hours, then there's no point spending 10 hours in bed worrying about it, right? So it's the idea that can we spend 5.5 hours just in bed and try and concentrate that sleep? And then people tend to get a bit better sleep and then realize that they're not getting enough. And then they can add another half an hour in and add another half an hour in. So it's kind of that, isn't it? That systematic
Absolutely.
reclamation, shall we say, of time.
How are we doing on time, Tom? I've not been checking.
We're at 40 minutes, so I wonder if it's a good time for us to segue into just thinking about sort of barriers in long-term relationships, because I know a lot of
that's
our
a good one.
listeners will be in long-term relationships or have been in long-term relationships where perhaps they're beyond that honeymoon period, Becky, and maybe things have, I was going to say dried up is the wrong term.
Maybe it's the right term.
Not as fluid as they used to be. Again,
Bad, very bad again. Yep.
So, yeah, I just wonder, what you see in your practice.
Yeah. Yeah. So what I see a lot is typically mismatch of desire. And I'm glad you brought in this honeymoon phase, because this is what I'm going to talk about now. So quite often I have people come to see me, and what they have is mismatch of desire, which means one person wants to have more sex, typically. One person wants to have less sex, typically. Not always. Sometimes it can be neither want to have sex, but just for this example. And what happens is when we're in this honeymoon phase, like you said, so we call this the limerence phase, the brain is like flooded with loads of feel-good hormones. So we have this dopamine that we keep on talking about, receptor, which makes us want to see the person all the time. We get rewarded when we see them. We get rewarded when we have sex with them. We get rewarded when they text us. We have our disgust response turns down. So this is why maybe at the beginning of a relationship, you do more sexually adventurous things. And later on, you're like, oh, I can't believe we did that. Right. Because maybe the disgust responses turn back to normal later on. And our logic response turns down. So that means we might like miss a work meeting because we want to stay in bed with our partner a little bit longer. Now, what happens when the limerence phase stops, these hormones stop flooding the brain. And this can happen at any time, but typically it's around the 2-year mark. But it can be 6 months, 6 weeks, 4 years, depending on the person or the brain. But typically 2 years. Is what happens is then people go to their set states. And this is when this like sexual fallout can happen. When I talk about set states, again, what I'm talking about is there's 2 types of sexual response in the world. So there are people that are spontaneous desire people. I'll tell you about them in a moment. And there are people that are responsive desire people. Spontaneous desire people are people who can get kind of aroused just like at a drop of a hat. Let's say they're like, yeah, I'm kind of up for it. They might be walking down the street and they're thinking, yeah, I want to, I would be up for having sex right now. They might not need specific context set up in order for them to be in that headspace. They're just kind of like, yeah, I'm ready. Let's go. Half the population. The other half of the population are what we call responsive desire people. Responsive desire people are those who need sexually relevant stimuli, whatever that is for that person, in order for their sexual desire to know to respond. So they need something in order for their desire to respond to. Right. So how this can look in relationships, and it is not completely binary gendered, but the research does show that more men fall into spontaneous and more women fall into responsive. At the beginning of relationships, because of the hormones, for nearly everyone or for nearly every relationship, but not every, it makes everyone feel spontaneous. It's almost kind of like fake because you've got all these hormones. Let's go, go, go. I don't need sexually relevant stimuli because all these hormones are making me feel like, we're ready. Then at that 2-year mark, let's say, if one person is responsive, maybe both are responsive. But if one person's responsive, they stop initiating. They might say no more. They don't feel aroused. They think that something's wrong. Well, actually, nothing's wrong. It's just that you need sexually relevant stimuli in order for your desire to respond. So a lot of the time, if I'm seeing like a heterosexual couple, and let's say they do fall into those binaries, so the man is spontaneous and the woman is responsive. I'm just giving those examples because that is more what I see in this. Yeah. Is the man will be like, well, she doesn't ever initiate. Well, of course she doesn't initiate because she's not feeling aroused. Her sexual response doesn't work like his does. She needs you to do X, Y, and Z, whatever she needs, in order for her desire to kind of build. Obviously, some people both have responsive, and then we have to work a little bit more broadly with, okay, if you're not waiting for sexual desire to come in order to initiate, because it's unlikely to come if you're responsive, what else can lead you to initiating? And this comes back to that question we spoke about before. What are your drivers for sex? Because if your driver is, well, I want to connect with my partner, I don't need to be aroused for that. I can just think, oh, I'd really like to connect with my partner now. I'm going to initiate. Yeah?
Yeah. So just to clarify, so when you've got so post-limerence, when you've got two responsives, you've got to be a bit more proactive. And
got to be more proactive, yeah.
Post-limerence, what if you've got two spontaneous? What do they just? Is it just like roll the dice and hope we both get a? Is it like that? I hope we're both on the same number at a given time.
I guess if both of you are good to go most of the time, you just say yes more often.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, you wouldn't have to rely on anything else, right? You'd just be ready to go. That'd be
okay, because you could just trigger them at any given moment, basically, like theory, roughly speaking. Yeah.
In theory, yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, and I think just that could be really confusing, couldn't it? For somebody, if somebody, let's say in your example, the male was very, sorry, not responsive. What were they? Responsive. Spontaneous. The male is spontaneous, and their partner is responsive.
Yeah.
And then that limerence phase passes, and then the partner goes to responsive and the other person stays spontaneous. That could be really confusing and sort of feed a lot of anxiety, couldn't it? Why? What have I done? Why do they not want to initiate?
Yeah.
And almost resentment, maybe, sometimes. You might think, oh, hold on, well, if you're not going to bother, then what's the point?
Yeah, or like, you're not initiating, so why should I?
So if people, that could then push people away, couldn't it? Or into paths of being unfaithful or whatever. So I just wonder, if more people understood that could be a really powerful thing. I'm glad we're talking about it here because I think, it's opening my eyes, definitely.
And I think it can be really sad for the person who's responsive as well, because they might be like, I don't understand it. I used to want to have sex with my partner all the time, and now I don't. I still think they're really attractive. And, and they don't understand what's going on either.
Yeah. Wow.
I have a slight digression, but can I it's a bit of a bugbear, actually. Since the uprise of like podcasters, obviously us all excluded, but I see a lot of these, like, you get quite a lot of like macho-y guys, and they say there's this phrase they say when in reference to a woman, which is, she has to give me sex, like, give me sex. And that's always really, the faces you're pulling is how I feel. Just that, that just doesn't feel right to me, that transactional expectation. And for various other reasons, I think that's quite wrong. But I think if we just applied what you were just saying to it, I think it just, that spontaneity from men. But what are they doing to earn the sexual desire from the responsive partner? Like, so if you are spontaneous and you feel you need more sex, you have to take some responsibility to, like, communicate that. And so it's not like, I paid the mortgage, you have to have sex with me. It's like, that is not what sex is. You have to come at it from a very different angle if you want to have more sex.
And there's something that we work with in relation to this spontaneous and responsive desire called accelerators and brakes, and this is going to link to what you were saying. So accelerators and brakes when it comes to sexual desire is the idea that an accelerator is anything that takes you towards being open-minded for a sexual experience, not a turn on. It's what takes you in the space where you're open to being turned on. Okay. And a brake is everything that takes you away from being open-minded to a sexual experience. Now, they are important for everyone, but for people who are responsive, they are really important. Because if you're in a situation where you've got 5 brakes but only 2 accelerators, you're not going to want to have sex if someone initiates, because your arousal cannot move because you've got these 10 brakes being pushed on. And a brake can be anything. It can be feeling insecure about your body. It can be having an argument with the other person. It can be stressed at work. It can be time of day. And oppositionally, accelerators can be anything as well. They can be about you, the person you're having sex with, anything, anytime, anywhere. Now, with what you're talking about is for a lot of women in heterosexual relationships, I've just realized the scaffolders are gone.
Hey.
I was so invested in this, I didn't even notice that the banging had stopped.
They want to knock on the door or something, get your attention, or they've just...
don't think so. They've gone. They're coming back.
We probably scared them off with the tiger erection story. Yeah.
What was I saying? So
accelerators and brakes.
Where
five brakes on, can't feel aroused.
Yeah, exactly. So a lot of women in heterosexual relationships feel like they hold, especially ones with kids, the emotional load of the family, the cognitive load. They feel like I'm in charge of getting the kids' lunchboxes ready, and I know where their book bag is, and I know where the dog go. You know, I hold all this. I plan our schedule. This isn't always, but this is just what I see a lot. They hold the emotional load. So when it comes to accelerators and brakes, and they say to their partner, an accelerator for me is when you do the washing up, the partner's like, what the hell? You know, that doesn't feel congruent to them, because they're like, spontaneous desire. What's the washing up got to do with it? But it's like, well, in this example, if you take away that emotion, that load of washing up, they can regulate. Now the capacity for sex has appeared.
Interesting.
So what you're talking about is like, give me sex or whatever. Yeah. Obviously, you know, we all think that's like horrible. And in my space, that's not what I see. I see men wanting their partners to want it, to enjoy it, right? It's not really what I see, thankfully.
That's much healthier.
Yeah, much healthier. Like, you know, they're not into it if their partner's not into it. For a lot of people I work with.
Exactly.
Because like, what's the fun in that, right? Yeah. But if they can help their partners with this emotional load or whatever else is on their accelerators and brakes list, then they're already increasing their chances.
Brilliant. That's really good to know, that, isn't it? If you've got a high sex drive and maybe not getting as much sex as you wanted, you have to understand whether your partner probably is responsive, and you need to understand what their brakes are in order to optimize the chances. You know, obviously no guarantees, but just to optimize it for both of you. That's really useful information, actually, like very clear information as well. So thanks for that.
Oh, good, because I just feel like I'm waffling. So
no, you're not waffling. No, you know, you're doing
Sounds
great.
Like we need to do more jobs around the house.
That's the takeaway.
That's the thing, though, right? Is I completely get that. It makes so much sense that if I was so stressed with all that heaviness, then, you know, thinking I haven't got space to even think about that because I've got to get and if all that kind of, or even an element of that dissipates, then you know, that would create space, I suppose, for that opportunity, and that's what we're looking for. Right? I think, you know, this is going to open a lot of people's eyes, Becky. I think there's a lot of people who have probably been sort of trying to get through the fog of unknown here with what's going on, and, you know, maybe being able to relate to a lot of this.
Yeah.
So if there is somebody out there who's sitting there thinking, okay, maybe we need to start having more conversations, I need to understand this more, what kind of advice would you give them? Where would you send them, or what would you ask them to do, or who could they speak to?
So I think speak to sex therapists, sexologists. There are loads of sexologists on Instagram who are kind of saying things or releasing videos that might be interesting. If you don't have the funds to see one in real life, you can go to your doctor. If you've got a sexual dysfunction or sexual difficulty, your doctor may be able to refer you to one free through the NHS. But if it's more from like a we're not having sex perspective, but we don't know why, they're unlikely to refer you at that point. But even having just a couple of sessions with a sex therapist could be really helpful. I would say make sure that the therapist is trained. So try not to see a relationship therapist who doesn't have expertise in sex if you're bringing the sex stuff, just because they may not know how to hold it in the same way. Obviously, you can talk to them in advance and see if they have experience, and maybe they do, and that would be okay. But I think, just try to have open conversations at home. Get your little talking stick. Whoever is holding the talking stick can talk, and the other person has to stay quiet, and swap the stick when they finish, swap it back. Really let the other person share their feelings and thoughts, and go in with a learner's brain, because we are learners when it comes to sex. We don't get taught this stuff.
Great advice. Thank you very much. Thank you. And I think it's going to help so many people and hopefully start so many conversations. Becky, is there anything else you wanted to cover before we think about the questions from our listeners?
No, don't think so. Anything else?
Tom, are you happy?
Yeah, I do have a funny story, but I think I might just say it in the chat after it.
No, go on.
Okay, I'll tell the funny story.
You've set one up now.
One time, my good friend Tim Holland-Pearse, whatever this young chap was called, I had
Where
this
is this going?
I had an audio book. It was about I think it was about premature ejaculation or something, and it was on my iPod. Anyway, driving along, and just had to pick my mum up for something. She got in the car, and I was like, "I'll just put some tunes on, plug the iPod in, and what have I left playing?" And that was a very awkward car journey as my sexual dysfunction book was just read aloud across everything. And we never spoke about that. So if you are listening, Mum.
Didn't your mum laugh? I imagine she would just laugh that off.
I've actually repressed that memory. I think it holds a lot of trauma. But no, I have not spoken up. I don't bring it up, funnily enough.
Did it have a whole plot line? What was this?
It wasn't like an erotic thing. It was like a textbook.
Oh,
just
Erotic
awful.
would have been even better.
Oh God, no. Yeah. Anyway,
good. Thanks for sharing, Tom.
I just need to get rid of that shame. We're carrying that shame for so long.
It does feel good to get that off your shoulders.
Yeah.
We get EMDR after.
Yeah. We should.
And this is definitely the space for it, 'cause it's not like we get hundreds of listeners.
That's not true. We get a solid 300 listeners.
I know. It's been sarcastic.
None of which have bought us a coffee. No, joking, listeners. We love you for who you are.
Okay, right. Questions from our listeners, if that's okay, Becky.
Yeah,
we do go out each week, and especially when we have guests, to ask for questions. So we've had 2 come in, if that's okay. The first one comes from Sarah, who's actually was our guest in our last episode, who came and spoke about childhood trauma. So check that one out, guys.
I watched that. That was excellent.
Yeah, wasn't it? Wasn't she great as well?
Amazing.
We've had some amazing feedback, and I know she has as well. A lot of people have reached out to her directly. So, please feel free to do so if anybody wants to chat to Sarah. I'm sure she'll make time for you. She might not thank me for saying that. Never mind, I've said it. Right, so Sarah says, sex drive differs between partners. What would you advise to help maintain a happy union between the two?
Well, I think we've covered it. I think communication, conversation is the most important thing, because what happens is we don't talk about this stuff, and then resentment builds and builds and builds. And then why are we not having sex becomes into an argument. And then people dread initiating sex, because initiating sex means we're going to have an argument because one of us won't want it, and then it leads down this negative spiral. So we need to rewrite the way that we're talking about sex, and then go back to what we were just talking about around what are your drivers, who's spontaneous, who's responsive desire, what are your accelerators and brakes, how do we then start working on decreasing the brakes and pushing the foot on the pedal of the accelerator, and broaden definitions of sex. Because if one person wants to have less sex, but sex could be having a naked bath for the other person, well, then maybe you could be having more sex, because maybe sex isn't what you think it is. It might be, but maybe it's not.
That's a very comprehensive answer. I really feel that could apply to everyone. I think that's such a good explanation of it. So, yeah.
And I hope that encourages people to kind of lift the taboo on that discussion and say, hey, this is where we are. We're both in the wilderness here. Let's talk about this and put it on the table so that we know what we can do with this. So Thank you so much. And thank you, Sarah, for the question as well. The next one comes from Catherine, who's one of our Instagram followers. And Catherine says, I've read that sleeping in separate beds can do wonders for well-being, but I'm worried about the impact on our relationship. How can we navigate this?
Okay, so it's about well-being, not sexual relationship well-being.
I think I'm reading between the lines here. They want to be in separate beds for a good night's sleep. Maybe someone's disruptive. And but they're worried about how that might impact sex. So any workarounds there?
The good news is it's actually recommended in Tantra to have separate bedrooms.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So, and also there's someone called Esther Perel, who maybe the listeners or yourselves have heard of. She's like a really big relationship therapist. And I'm going to talk about her in a moment because she talks about these types of things. But in Tantra, the idea is that you want a bit of separateness from your partner in order for that sexual desire to be present. So they talk around if you have the luxury of having more than one bedroom, great. Sleep in separate bedrooms. You can still spend time with each other. You can invite each other in. It could be a bit more like you're dating, when you invite each other around to your houses, and, that time is intentional. It means that the time you spend in bed together is probably going to lead to more intimacy rather than just sitting there scrolling on your phone like most of us do. In Tantra, they even say that you shouldn't be eating the same meals. They go really quite into this. They say, I think it's like no more than 3 times a week should you be sharing the same meal, and it's to do with like pheromones and all of that stuff. Now, if you don't really know anything about Tantra or you're not interested in that, this is where Esther Perel comes in, and you can, Google her. She's got incredible books. Mating in Captivity is one of them. And that actually might be interesting for the person who wrote this question. And what she talks about is this separateness. So the idea is when you live with a long-term partner, you become so close to them emotionally that it's almost like you can't see them anymore. They're almost like, I like to explain it as like my husband's like my arm, right, in this example. And I don't really see him. And then every once in a while I look at him and I'm like, wow, you're really handsome, actually. Like, I don't see you anymore. And this is part of the problem, because back in the day, hunter-gatherers, again, it would take like a whole village to bring up a child, or, to help support a maternal unit. So you wouldn't actually be seeing your partner that much. They would be going off, they'll do the hunting, or they'll be staying back and doing whatever, the cooking or whatever it is they did. And you just come together, have conversation, have sex, and then be apart again. But what that does is it keeps this rawness, this sexuality going. And that's why some people have more sex when they've just come back on holiday, or this desire makes the heart grow fonder type thing. It's all the same theory. So unrelated to the question, which I'm going to circle back to, but just something that I think is really nice, is Esther Perel says about how if you feel like you're in this predicament where maybe you're not really feeling arousal for your partner, is to look at them through a new person's eyes. Go to the pub, someone walks in and sees your partner. Imagine what does that person see? What are they looking at? Can you see your partner through that real or fictionalized person's eyes? And I think for me anyway, it works a lot. And I'm like, wow, I can really see you now. So the idea is, if we have separateness, like sleeping in separate beds, great. A little bit more mystery, make that time intentional, but just make sure you do make the time. Don't be always going off to your own beds. Have conversations. Shall we share a bed this evening? Or shall we, share a bed until whoever goes to sleep earliest goes to sleep? And then you've still got that time. It's intentional. But that's what we need in long-term relationships anyway, intentionality.
Yeah, so it's all great as long as you commit to that.
Exactly.
Yeah, that intentionality.
Yeah, because if not, well, then you are just not. We're treating your chances because you're not in a context that encourages intimacy. But if you make sure that context is still there, Tuesdays and Thursdays, we go up to bed 2 hours early and just hang out instead of watching telly, or when we feel like it, we invite each other in. Brilliant. The context is still there.
I like the idea of inviting someone in. It's kind of that, this is my space. You can come in sometimes.
Yeah.
Not all the time.
And that's important too.
Yeah.
We need time on our own. We need time to do our things and have our own passions and hobbies, and we take that excitement, that energy back into the relationship.
Nice.
Great, thank you. And thank you so much for your answer. That was really thorough. It kind of almost feels normal now. Maybe we've been doing this wrong for years. Maybe we should be in separate beds. And
honestly, I would love my own room. I would love it. Me and Alexis, my husband, go to bed at different times. And I mean, that's kind of enough for me because I go to bed earlier. I get the whole bed to myself, and then I'm asleep by the time he comes in. I prefer it.
Fair enough. Great. Okay. So that really brings us to the end, really, where Becky would just invite you, if you want to, and you don't have to, just to set Tom and I a homework for us to look at in between our sessions. And this could go anywhere, couldn't it? So throw it at us. Well, best to agree to it, okay?
Homework. Okay. So I think, the homework I would set you is to get out your talking sticks with your partners and try to have an honest and frank conversation around sex. Like, are your needs being met? Does anyone want to have a different type of sex than what you're doing? You know, do both of us feel okay about the initiation? You know, do we want to talk about accelerators and brakes and spontaneous and responsive desire? What can we do if sex doesn't go the way we want it to? How can we recover from that? Are we doing that well? Are we supporting each other after sex?
I think that's excellent because, well, I'll speak for myself, but I don't think we've ever had a chat of that nature. Like, you know, you just sort of go through the motions and then, very British, have a cup of tea.
Yeah.
Back on with your day. Yeah.
Well, I think in sex we expect the other person to read our mind. Well, they should know. They don't know.
Yeah. This is what I was saying about the instruction manual earlier. Like, I'm more convinced than ever that it's a great idea.
I think it's a great idea.
But I think having that conversation I could see the value of that massively.
Just to bring a bit of experience here, and I don't mean experiences in this is my experience, just my experience of being set that homework. I feel a little bit anxious. Like I'm not sure what that could bring up, but I think that's only a good thing, because that would then mean that there's opportunities for learning. I'm kind of, how am I going to even bring that up to my wife? I'll have to find a way. And again, Chris, I'm sorry if you're listening to this. This is just.
Well, this is the way. If Chris is listening, brilliant.
Yeah. So yeah, I think let's go for it. Let's see. We'll record it, and for anyone who subscribed to our Patreon, you can get exclusive access. No, I'm joking. You can't. There is no Patreon. But
yes,
that really would be therapist in the hot seat right there.
I'm worried that we're going to have the talking stick chat and I'm going to get feedback she doesn't like any of my moves. But I've only got about 3 moves, so I'm like, well, yeah.
But then she needs to write the guidebook and then you're sorted.
She does.
And how many people are out there saying, I've only got 2 moves, what's this for? What's the third move? It's at least the tiger move. Anyway. Okay, well, thank you very much for the homework. We'll keep you updated. And Becky, what we're going to do around Christmas, this hasn't really been formally agreed, but we're going to invite all of our guests back to have a bit of a round table. So if you're up for it, we'd love to have you back just to pop on and chat and share a drink with us and have a laugh. And so if you're around, we'll love to get you back for that.
Yeah, that would be lovely. Great.
Okay, well, in that case, just a huge thank you to everybody for listening. Tom, I think we managed to get through that episode without getting cancelled, but we'll soon find out. Thank you for listening. If you have enjoyed the episode, then you can find Becky on Instagram. We'll pop the Instagram into our show notes and any websites as well that are relevant there too. We'll also put the link to our website where you can go and say hi and just visit and see what we're all about. We'll also put our Instagram on there as well. So if you want to like us or give us a follow, please do so. We'll be back in 2 weeks' time, hopefully with the episode on relationship OCD, unless I break my leg or something else.
First episode.
In between. But other than that, it's just to say thank you so much to Becky. So
You're welcome. It's been such a pleasure.
And thank you, Tom. As always, thank you for your stories. And
sorry about the last story. I kind of the heat at the moment, but do regret that one actually.
Like, I wish we did editing. Can we get it out?
Well, it's out there now, so there we go.
And thank you to everybody for listening. Take care, and we'll see you in 2 weeks' time.
Take care, guys.